So again, thank you for joining for today's live session. Before we get started, I need to let you know that the information contained in this presentation is meant for guidance purposes only and not as professional, legal, or tax advice. And further, does not give any personalized legal, tax, investment, or any business advice in general. I want to have a discussion here and just kind of give a little more color and context to what we see happening. So first, let's talk about what we're seeing now. And I want to give you what kind of a healthy dose of reality. It's not meant to be defeating, but I want to kind of ground you in some realities of the industry right now. And what we're doing right now in the cannabis industry is we're doing what they call crossing the chasm. There's a good little run up. Now there's this gap. We have to find a way to cross that gap. And not everyone's going to cross that gap. Some people are going to fall into that chasm. What we're trying to do is give you some thoughts here today. Now, I saw an article that came out that the industry is going to be worth $47 billion by 2025. That's 5 years from now. Now, let's put that into context of just a single company. Anheuser-Busch, it's a $90 billion company right now. So we're in the very, very beginning stages of the industry. So there's no need to rush and try to get it all done right away. But what we've seen over the past 2 years is a lot of money pouring in and a lot of energy being poured into the business here. And a lot of equity investments, but you're also seeing a lot of debt investments, a lot of debt notes. So what that's created is a lot of over-leveraged companies with lopsided balance sheets. So people were betting on the future of this green rush. They're gonna, make all this money, but the revenue's not matching the ability to pay back that debt service. So a lot of operators have been kind of living in this bubble that everyone's going to buy cannabis because it's legal. It's very hard to change consumer patterns just because something is legal. That necessarily wasn't the impediment. It was maybe a psychological barrier. Nancy Reagan did a great job scaring people in the 80s. So that may be a thing we're pushing up against. But it's going to take a lot more time to kind of see this explosive growth, if there will ever be explosive growth. Now, another thing that we noticed is that people thought that, okay, the switch from medical to recreational is going to be an amazing pop. But kind of saw that, in California, because that medical market has been around for so long that it allowed the black market to grow so much and kind of get in every little corner of the city. So you saw an incremental bump. Now, when you see something like an Oklahoma go from zero to medical, and now it's like this wild growth, that's that's pretty awesome. It's an outstanding thing to see. It's a great thing to see, but that kind of explosive growth is unsustainable. I read that they have 2,400 dispensaries now and 6,200 growers. There's just no way that they can sustain all of those businesses. Now, yes, operating costs are lower in that state. There's just no way to sustain that. Now, there's going to be a kind of a collapse of that, right? A collapse of some people are just going to have to get out of the business. Collapse and consolidation. Consolidation means that people that have cash are not going to go buy some businesses. So I just want to kind of put it out here that we're already seeing people reach out to us on our side that either are looking for bridge funding, they're looking to sell their license because they ran out of money and can't build their business. They're looking to sell their business because it's not as profitable as they thought. And that's the key word, profitability. It's great. You can make $2 or $6 or $8 or $12 million, but what are you taking home at the end of the day? And that's one thing you see the headlines. It's like, oh, they make all this money, but it's about the flow through of that cash, right? You have to have a robust tax strategy, and you have to have the ability to save your margins. If not, it doesn't matter how much money you make. We're also seeing people reach out to us that are investors looking to audit the businesses that they've invested in. And that's a very, very big thing to pop out and kind of look at, is that these investors are not just going to say, oh, you lost the money. This is not tech 2008. This is cannabis 2020, and people are really about their money right now. And major markets like LA, seeing the squeeze, big markets, explosive markets like the Oklahoma, they're seeing the same thing. So be thoughtful of over the next 6 to 8 months when we start to see this kind of collapse and consolidation is that you really, really need to run your business by a P&L. You have no more hope and hype to run on right now. That whole wave is gone. Now it's about managing your business financially. Don't take on too many liabilities that place fear into your body or to your business. Don't spend money that you don't have. Because if you get caught with an extremely lopsided balance sheet over the next 6 to 12 months, you will be out of business. Again, there's no going to be huge pop in growth. You see it for the first few months. Like in Illinois, you saw all this cannabis being sold, but that is not sustainable, right? So businesses that have cash on hand, you're going to do really, really well, hopefully, because you can weather the storm. But look, now is the time to start potentially buying those licenses or buying those businesses that are struggling for 15 cents on the dollar. 20 cents on the dollar. One last thing, I'll make a remark here. Two last things. Institutional money is coming in even hot and heavy now, even more than they actually were. But they're looking for businesses to buy that have audited financials, businesses that have good tax filings, that have standard operating procedures. They're going to do a ton of due diligence on you. If you want to exit this industry, you need to set yourself up for that exit 2 to 5 years before that actually happens. You can't just say, oh, we're going to sell the business in 3 months and try to get this all together. It's a process that starts now. So I want to make that very, very clear. And last thing I want to talk about here is that audits are ramping up. There was a great article, kind of an op-ed piece that came out about Denver. In Denver, didn't even know they were calculating or under collecting their sales tax. And this is at every level of the government. We're seeing this here. And what you see kind of in the macro with all these businesses closing down, right, your regular restaurants and your regular retail, is that most cities make their money off of sales tax. No commerce, no sales tax, which means we're going to start digging. So you're going to start to see more and more audits. In California, we're passing this thing called the de minimis threshold. Once you hit that 3-year mark, the agencies are saying, all right, well, there's now enough liability here for us to start going fishing. And one article that kind of pointed that out is the last thing I'll say here is that Weedmaps got a subpoena from the U.S. government, I don't know, like a week or two ago, or maybe a month ago, but the article came out recently. And it asked for a bunch of information about licensed operators, unlicensed operators, any communications they've had with this person or that person. No one really knows what is going on with this, but it's a fishing expedition, we'll say, by the U.S. government to see what can they find and what can they kind of hammer against the wall. So don't think that because it's legal by the state that the governments at the federal level are just going to kind of sit on their hands. There's some real big movement here. We're just not going to see what those waves are. There's a lot of rumblings under the ocean, but those waves will come. And I just want to kind of preface that and give you this information before we jump into the Q&A here. So one last thing, drop your questions into the chat. I see we've got a fair amount of them being dropped in here. And we're going to jump right into the prepared questions, people that sent in early. But go ahead, drop questions in. We'll get to them as soon as we can. So, Derek, why don't you hop into that first one here from Dan?
Yeah, definitely. So the question from Dan is, let's see here, 2018, 2019 was a big year for investments. Now what are the results in 2020? So
we're going down lower is the Q&A
down
portion.
Lower?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. So the question we have from Dan is, can you share any comps around purchases in businesses and specifically licenses? So what you'll generally see is retail licenses across the board generally hold value because that's where the bottleneck always resides. When you think about other types of license types, let's say cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, the value of those license types is not as much as a retail because you generally want to shift those to very low cost jurisdictions. So for example, in California, you'll generally want to have those license types in the Central Coast where it has a lower cost of capital. Historically, most people were generally growing cannabis, either in the Emerald Triangle, so in Northern California, or in the warehouses of downtown LA. It doesn't make sense to do cultivation in a metropolitan neighborhood if you don't have the existing infrastructure set up in place, right? Because, having a cultivation site in downtown San Francisco where your rent is, $30,000, $40,000 a month, you're just not going to make that much money after taking into consideration 280E and all the other, cultivation tax requirements. They all add up and they all eat out at your bottom line. So when you're thinking about coming up with, an average price per pound that you want to market it, try to push those taxes onto the customer, because if you don't factor those into your own internal calculations, your net profit margin is going to sink dramatically. And unfortunately, this is a good and bad. Each market's different, so if you look at Oregon, the price per pound just plummeted because they had so many cultivators. In California, it's relatively stayed solid because California has been slow to adapting new licenses. They're just, they're moving really, really slow in this state. Ultimately, at the end of the day, once cannabis gets dropped from the Controlled Substance Act and it gets moved from maybe a Schedule 1 to Schedule 5 or just removed completely, you're going to see a lot of the cultivation being done in the Midwest. It's just from a cost perspective, it's the most efficient place to have cultivation done. So, states like Oklahoma, where there's a huge oversaturation, you're going to see a big bump and a lot of the largest cultivators coming out of there. But if you're looking to sell licenses, what I would really recommend for people to do, whether you're on the buy side or potentially on the sell side, is to think about an earnout. That's just the best way, because if you're on the sell side, you need to look at it from a liability perspective. You just signed on a 5 or 10-year lease that you clearly can't afford, right? And if you personally guaranteed the lease and or you personally signed the lease, you could be on the hook for that lease. If you have the company sign for it, maybe potentially the company could file for bankruptcy if you set up a multi-entity approach. But if it's the cannabis entity that signed the lease, you generally can't file for bankruptcy. So you're stuck with a stinking bag of crap. So, an earnout is a potentially great way to get out of your obligations and push that onto someone else. Let's see.
Yeah, and one thing I want to kind of add in here is that license supply is increasing dramatically, right? You're going to people want to sell their dispensaries in LA for $5 million. We're past that. That was 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe even up to 15. But now we're like 200 or 300 now. We're going to add 200 or 300 in the next year. There's no really big value in that license. The real big value is in the business that you build from that. It's from the standard operating procedures and the cash flow of that business. Again, it's not that top line revenue. And also you look at, why is the buyer buying this license? Are they buying it to access new tax laws, right? If it's a distributor or a retailer trying to buy a manufacturing or cultivation license that allows them to take, more expenses for different tax laws, or is it just somebody who's green and just wants to get into the industry? You may be able to get a bit of higher premium in that. But a good back of the envelope for your business here is looking at all the costs to get the license. And the main cost of that is going to be rent when you sit on that license application. As the social equity applicants are well aware of, and anybody in LA, you had to sit on rent for potentially 18 to 24 months at $10,000, $20,000 a month. That's not cheap. So that's kind of the license minimum there. It's the rent cost, the application cost, and if you had to do any build out costs, you should at least recover what you put into the business. And one last thing to build on what Derek said about the earnout, avoid all these stock purchase things. Okay, don't let anybody say they're going to give you stock in their company to buy out that business. Get cash up front. You don't know. Cannabis is very volatile. You don't know if that company's going to be around, right? Like the High Times deal that came out this week. The Harvest took $12.5 million in stock in High Times, and then $60 million in stock, and then $67 million in stock and $12 million in cash for 13 dispensaries. Now it's $1 million a dispensary. Not all of them are built out, but be thoughtful on how you actually take that business coming in.
Yeah. So 2 quick questions. One from Peter is there's earnouts usually don't work. Too many ways to monkey with accounting. Earnouts, you want to do a percentage off their top line. It's the most basic. It's the most clear. You don't have to work. If you try to do an earnout on net income, they will always just load up the expenses, give themselves high salaries so they don't earn anything. But if you do a solid earnout off the top line, it's indisputable, right? You also want to have access to all their bank records. You want to be able to access all their financial records, and you have to get that stated up front to make sure that they don't, monkey with anything. Dan, another question, is vertical integration still a good idea, specifically in Oklahoma? Really good question, Dan. What we've seen across the board is the people that are most successful are ones that are able to master each vertical at a time. So the issue that a lot of people have is they're like, oh, seed to sale right away. And they try to get into various service lines that are or various parts of the supply chain that are just so different. Running a cultivation site and running a retail are just completely different companies. And you want to make sure that if you do want to go the vertical route, that you master it first. Because think about it this way. You and I are competitors. You're trying to run 3 companies at the same time. Well, I'm just running 1. I'm going to get really good at just running cultivation while you're trying to run cultivation, manufacturing, and retail. The capital infrastructure, the cash flow, right? So when you get paid and when you have to pay things, they're just totally different. So It's really hard to tackle all three at once, and it's better just to be perfect at one thing and then potentially think about branching out.
Yeah, Tori's question. Let's get to Tori's.
Yeah, what advice do you have for a small craft cannabis business that wants to retain ownership and compete during the collapse and consolidation phase? I think the best thing that you can do during this time is just have a really good pulse and tone with your customers. Your customers are going to be your best advocates. You could try to blow a bunch of money on advertising, but at the end of the day, the money goes out, and then you try to see an increase in sales, but at various times, it's difficult to say. But having a really solid, strong core customer base that is the advocate of your product, that's the best way to go, hands down. And also really being able to define who are you targeting and where do these people reside, and making sure, let's say you're a value brand, trying to go to MedMen, it's not the best choice. MedMen tries to mark up their products tremendously. MedMen also doesn't pay their bills half the time. So, we have a lot of clients that have, a lot of outstanding obligations to them. So, it's really making sure you align your retail efforts with who your audience is. And when picking out retailers, just be smart.
Another one here. Yeah, another thing here is don't go too big too quickly, right? You're a craft grower, so you probably got a cap, but don't grow too quickly. Don't try to get 100 houses up or 100 rooms up, or start small and create cash flow from a certain spot in your facility. Make sure that is cash flow positive, and then move to the next and scale up your rooms. One thing about cultivation, it's very easy to look like you're making a bunch of money. Also very easy to look like you're losing a bunch of money because the capital investment is way up front, and you hopefully don't get a bad crop so you can recover that money. So make sure that each room is profitable before you scale up too large. Don't go too big too quickly. It's better to kind of have too much demand, because then if there's demand for your craft grow, especially if you stick to like a 20-year-old Afghan fade, type of flower or something like that, it's very special and specific that only you have, then you can be demanding more of your product, or be demanding more price for your product. So don't go too big too quickly. Don't try to boil the ocean, right? Try to take over one or two retailers.
So Ernie asks, what segments of the industry are most at risk and why? It's generally the cultivation and manufacturing. What you'll see is there'll be a price decrease, and my one caveat is it's totally and entirely state by state dependent, right? Because you have a state like Florida where there's less than a dozen license holders. Unless you're a massive bonehead, all license holders will make money without a doubt. Whereas you go to a state like Oklahoma where there's just such high saturation, pretty much everyone's at risk, because $2,500, you could get your license, you're off and running. A state like California, there's been a huge bottleneck at the retail level. So in California specifically, the segments of the industry that are probably most at risk are on the manufacturing and cultivation side. But again, it's just on a case by case basis.
Let's say, and kind of the thing is that, like, well, how do we, balance that, right? As a manufacturer, cultivator, one of the things that we're seeing, manufacturers do if they can't push their own products is to do white labeling for other brands, right? Try to be that onboarding and that conduit to bringing new people into the industry. You'll notice that you'll see it everywhere. Everybody wants to get into cannabis, but they don't have $1 million. You have the kind of beginning infrastructure to onboard people into this industry. So figure out multiple ways to make different revenue. The businesses that are going to stick around are the ones that have diverse revenue streams. They have brands in multiple states. They have storefront and delivery. Vertically integrated businesses, like Derek said, you kind of overexpose yourself because you have way too much to manage if you're not having like a head of each part of the business. So be very thoughtful of, again, not going too big too quickly. And then I think, you got to look at what your obligations are. If you're going to end up getting out of this business and stuck with that lease, what is your alternative use case for that lease, right? For a manufacturer, you're probably out in the middle of nowhere. It's very little things you can do with that business, but a retailer potentially could turn that into a new type of store. So when you start to get into these liabilities or obligations, make sure you're kind of understanding, if this cannabis thing doesn't work out for me, because it will work out, this industry is going to go. But if you don't do it right, what are you going to do with the other 8 years of that lease? You don't want to have to pay out $1.8 million and not have a lease or anything to show for it. So be thoughtful about your alternative use case for your big obligations, or can you sell your equipment off, things of that nature. So be thoughtful on that. All right. Any other questions here specifically we can jump into? Kim asked, when is this industry going to go federally legal? Everybody's got their own little opinion about this. I don't think that that's going to be anytime soon. I think that there are bigger issues at we live in a bubble. We all talk about cannabis all the time. We think that, this should be legal, this should be legal. But there are a lot of industries pushing to keep this kind of contained, the powers that be or whatever it's going to be like that. And I think it will be, a candidate, whether like a federal candidate, a presidential candidate that has to really stand for this. And the two that are coming up in November, I don't think either of them are really too pro cannabis. So it's they brush that question off very, very quickly. So I would say, in my opinion, it's not coming in the next 4 years. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, Derek.
Yeah. And I would carry on with that. And then Peter's question, can you provide an update on status 280E? We're at this stage with our current candidates and what they publicly stated. We're 4 years off from any sort of federal legalization. I mean, that's just where it is. David's question, which market segments are you more optimistic about? Edibles, for example. This is actually a really good question, David. And instead of thinking about, let's say, supply chain, I would think about geographic location, because that's what really drives profitability. Right? Cannabis is, at the end of the day, just a land grab and a brand grab. So instead of thinking, maybe I'll start a grow or I'll start an edible line, I would look at states and how they're licensing. But of course, I say that cautiously because, if you look at, let's take Pasadena, for example, a city in Los Angeles County, over, 100 applicants for 6 licenses. The guys that didn't apply, they ended up suing the city. And we saw that also with the social equity program here in Los Angeles, California. So really, at the end of the day, you get the right license in the right jurisdiction, that will drive profitability more than anything else. And to Jen's earlier point, if it all fails, can I make money on the back end? Almost always in terms of selling and transferring licenses, given the city and the state allow for that. There's certain cities, for example, West Hollywood and Los Angeles, that don't allow for transfer of licenses. So you also have to look at that. But if you guys are really looking to make and generate substantial revenues, you got to look at cities and states and their licensing regimen.
Yeah. So Tori brings up, in Colorado, price per pound fluctuates seasonally, making it, really challenging to forecast. Any advice? And that's going to happen everywhere for sure, because when outdoor crop, like Croptober, right? October is when everything just kind of goes way down in price because there's so much cannabis. But, maybe in the first quarter, second quarter of the year, when you're the indoor grower, you're able to kind of demand a little bit more for your product. I would say make sure you save more during those months and be ready to kind of take care of your bills on the later half of the year when the outdoor harvest comes in. That's just a small thing you can do here. Derek, do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, so there's a really good question from Dan. Are there any comps for licensed sales in California that you can discuss? Honestly, Dan, and when we're talking about supply chain, so cultivation, manufacturing, it's at this stage, it's really, really speculative, right? Because, and we see this all the time, someone who has, cultivation, distribution, manufacturing license in LA, and they think their license is worth $1 million. Go down the street, go to Long Beach, where they're completely open for licensing, right? Yeah, you may have to wait, but then at least at that stage, you can say, okay, to skip the line to the front, I'm willing to pay $200,000. And, at the end of the day, what a license is worth is simply what someone's willing to pay you for it, right? You can say your license, your base social equity license is worth $1 million. Well, who wants to pay for that, right? If someone's only willing to give you $100,000, then that's your market worth. You can either sit on the license and wait for that $1 million, or it could potentially expire, or you could say, you know what, I need the money now. This guy's going to give me $100,000. I'll take it. So, at the end of the day, the market value is simply driven by what someone's willing to pay for it.
Yeah, and you see those comps, those big numbers. They always write about the big ones, the $7 to $8 million, the one that's close to downtown, or sorry, to the LAX airport. That one's like everyone's been seeing that one kind of float around at 7, 8, 9, $10 million. Who knows if that's going to sell? It may have already sold. I don't know, but like Derek said, things are only worth what people are willing to pay for it. And if people's purse strings are contracting right now, the only premium is to skip the line. But if they know that this is a kind of a slow growth, it will grow. What's the point of skipping the line if I can just wait? Because LA County, yeah, it's like, not that big of a deal. You can kind of place yourself in the right spot. Go out to Cathedral City, wait the extra 6 months, save on operating costs, and then get into your license. That's the kind of things that people are thinking about, because these are more sophisticated people. They're not running again on that hype and that excitement and that hope. The green rush is kind of gone. The media blew that out, and real true operators that have been in the business for at least, 6 months to 12 months, that have done their one tax cycle, understand that there's no hype. There should be no hype in this. This is a very tough industry to be in. You might want to actually be in the laundry business compared to being in cannabis when you start seeing the real numbers out of this.
So one last question from Patricia that came in. It's a really interesting question. My business has a high interest loan, 14%. We took from private investors, and the payment's really high. We can cover product cost, rent, and everything else, but the loan payment are way too high to pay up and keep up with. This is a classic example of things you want to try to avoid. You never want to take on debt where you can't service the debt, because what's going to end up happening is you put in all this, blood, sweat, and tears in your business. The investor could theoretically force you into receivership and just take over all your work and pay you nothing, and you walk away with empty-handed. So if you are an investor and it looks like you're not going to get your money back, push the operator into receivership, which pretty much you get a court-appointed person to then sell off all the assets. And the coolest thing about receivership, if you're an investor, is that whatever money you owe or the business owes you, you could use that as an opening bid. So what happens in receivership is the receiver is a court-appointed person who will then sell the license as an open market free auction, and the person whoever bids the highest gets the assets. So, the amount that you loan to the individual, that's you can use that as an opening bid.
Good deal.
Another question from Luis. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Another question from Luis is, how do you find buyers for your cannabis business? Luis, feel free to send us an email. You could just send it to me directly, Derek, DEREK at Green Growth CPAs. Let me know what the business is, where it's located, if you have financials, and we always have investors in our network that might be interested in purchasing it. And that also goes out to anyone else on this live chat. If you have a business that you're looking to exit, please email me the details. We do have some investors that are looking for good deals, but I just need to put a caveat that this isn't 2018. Licenses are largely speculative, and generally speaking, you're looking at maybe 3 to 5 times of EBITDA. So when you look at your net income, you apply a multiple of 3 to 5 years, and that's generally what you're looking at.
Yeah, and one thing to add, and Peter brings this up too, is like about the debt situation, is like talk to your person who's servicing the debt to you and like try to renegotiate something. But in most cases, they're gonna, probably tell you, just you got to pay the bill you said you signed up for. So receivership is that next best option. And it's something, especially like, there's a few options for receivership, right? You could also have like co-founder disputes where like you guys are just not seeing eye to eye, or one of the co-founders is doing some pretty shady stuff. It all starts with litigation. We're not lawyers, but one thing you can do is kind of push the business into some type of litigation where then a receiver is then appointed to the business. It's a little more private. It's more cost effective than bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is not able to be accessed by the cannabis industry, but it is something that you can look into as receivership. Sharon says, Sharon, thank you for joining in. You always join in. I'm glad to see it. So she says, what about accounting firms? I'm swamped. Yeah, man, like the service side of the business, like the people that are really making like a good dent and taking, good stuff home are like a lot of the service industries, your waste management companies, the unsexy stuff, waste management, lawyers, the testing labs are crushing it right now. accountants. Everybody needs to file their taxes. Cannabis consultants, I think that's kind of like a really shady, hit or miss kind of business, unless they have some proven traction. But yeah, accountants are doing well for the most part that we see. I mean, I think that's a recession-proof kind of business that you're seeing. Yeah, Peter said, try to stop making personal guarantees. Most businesses will not allow you, or most lenders will not lend to you unless that, because they know that they can't just dismiss this debt. So it's a balance of the whole thing here, trying to figure that out. One question we got before this, and I want to kind of hit on to, is that Chris asked, sales are going up. How long will this actually last? And I think it was a very short question, but I think he's talking about the stuff during the kind of shelter in place stuff. We're seeing a lot of businesses like up 300% in sales and this and that. People were stockpiling cannabis just as they were stockpiling food. So at some point, they're going to no longer need to buy an ounce every time they come in. So you're going to see kind of like a compression in that and get back to normal. So two things. Make sure you don't spend all that money you made. Save that cash as much as you can and only pay what you absolutely necessarily need to. And make sure you're allocating all of the money you're taking in that is for taxes into a separate account. Do not use your tax, like the income you're making from tax, as any type of operating capital. We've seen this at least twice last year where two businesses kind of got into like bankruptcy territory because they were using their tax excise, those distribution companies, using their excise taxes they collected. You think you're really rich when you're collecting all that cash, right? Don't delude yourself. That money's not yours. You're just a custodian for the state. So make sure that you put that money away and don't use it as operating capital, because when it's due, it's due. And the penalties, at least in California, it's 50% on excise tax. You miss it by 1 day, you could be looking at a couple $100,000 in penalty. And there's no abatement for that particular tax fine and penalties. So be very thoughtful on that. All right, we'll see what ones you got in here. Review the companies. Okay, so Sharon says she reviewed a company's P&L and tax return and told the client to run fast. Business was not telling the truth and not to purchase it. So I brought this up a little earlier. The due diligence now is much, much more robust than it was even 2 years ago. People that are buying your business are going to want to see audited financials. They're going to want to see all of your tax filings. They're going to want to see all of your standard operating procedures. They're going to want to spend a couple days inside the business to see how it actually runs. They're going to interview everybody that works for the business. It's going to be a lot harder to sell your business now. So kind of building on what Daniel asked, what is the value of a license? The value of the license is all the collateral that goes into that due diligence as well. So if you're going to be it's going to be painful due diligence because you're not ready for it, you will not get a lot for it. You're going to get like a discount given because the data is not there to support what you say. Even if you're making this money, if you don't have the data to support it or the documents to support it, you will not get a good value on that sale, that license. And we got a poll in here, so go ahead and drop into the poll. Just letting us know how often you'd like us to go live. We're kind of testing this out and seeing, what can we do? How can we provide more value to you guys? I know you're either at home or, whatever's going on. So we want to provide more value. So let us know how often you think we should go live on here. Daniel brings up, I run a distribution company with a few popular product lines. I want to get more vertical to increase your margins. Am I better off buying a farm to increase my supply or a delivery license to increase my price point? What are the tax implications of going down the supply chain versus going up the supply chain? This is a fantastic question, a multi-part question here. So, Derek, let's break this down into two pieces. Should he go up or should he go down the supply chain? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, it all depends on the licensing. So, if you're one of 5 retail licenses in the city, obviously go retail. It just at the end of the day, it just depends on where you're going to get the license and how the city's licensing, and also how many black market operators. That should always be the starting point in terms of how you look at profitability. And then, Vinat also asked, is the delivery license available in all states? Not all states. So you also have to look at what state that you want to operate in.
Yeah, one thing I want to add on to Daniel's question here. I would say go towards the customer. The closer you are to the customer, the more control you have of everybody downstream, right? If you said you have a few great brands, you can get bigger margins for those sales as well. But then you also allow brands to do marketing for your business, right? You always see like, oh, ABC brand is available through this distributor, through this retailer. Getting closer to the customer can almost always be the better choice, but it does have that caveat. What is the supply of the licenses? If there's 100 deliveries in a city that's only 12 square miles, it's not going to be very easy. But maybe having some kind of toehold in delivery could be especially good. The tax implications is a lot to kind of break down into this, so I'm not sure we can give you that kind of thoughtful stuff. But going down into the supply chain, getting into a manufacturing or cultivation, does open you up to back a few more indirect costs into COGS, but it does add the complications of trying to run the being a really great grower and being a great manufacturer. You already have experience in distribution, so you're going to delivery would only be like, all right, we'll just got to go to houses instead of warehouses. So that might be something to be thoughtful of. I think you have a good opportunity to move up the supply chain instead of being back down. But both have their benefits. You have to do a really good financial analysis for you to see where you're at. Because if you're like operating a distribution company at $4 or $5 million, maybe it makes sense to go both ways. But a plan to kind of roll it out over a few quarters. Look into that. Downtown area in LA with few delivery licenses. If you can get your hands on some delivery licenses in LA, just don't pay too high of a premium. Again, we're bringing this up. All the microbusinesses will get their delivery license probably this year, and the delivery pilot program is rolling out soon. Who knows? I don't know when that's happening, but it will roll out. So don't pay some $1 million unless you're really sure you can make that money back. But on the premium on that, you probably won't be able to make that back. But I'm not sure. I think we have to do a financial analysis for you on that. And yes, 280E does get more burdensome when you go into retail, but there are ways to mitigate that if you go a little more vertically integrated. Just having they call it light manufacturing. You don't have to become out here with all the machines and everything. There are some benefits to having some light manufacturing, using some 471 allocations to kind of reduce your indirect costs. Yeah, you haven't seen that microbusiness will receive delivery license. It was like the talk at the end of 2019. Then the whole like dropping the ball with phase 3, right? That's become like the biggest mess. I think the biggest epic fail in licensing that we've seen, and I feel bad for everyone that's tied up into that. But it was the talk that once they go for the renewals, they have the option to add that delivery. They will get it at some point. I'm not sure when, but just know that these delivery businesses will be popping off more and more. So don't pay too much of a premium for that. All right. But yeah, again, timing on that is not set in stone for that specifically. Let's see what else we got here. Peter asks, how can one get involved in lobby for federal tax reform in the cannabis industry? I mean, just reaching out to your specific lobbying groups, getting your lobbying license, and then, getting into that. You can do that as well. That's something you can look into. But lobbying for tax reform is going to be a very, very uphill battle right now. I don't think that it's going to be easy to change. I know you said earlier, Peter, you think that 280E is not tied to legalization. It is 100% because it's a Schedule 1 controlled substance. That's why it is tied to 280E and tied to legalization. Descheduling is not just going to, I don't think that they're going to pull the two away and deschedule it. I just kind of built onto that. But lobbying is something you can potentially look into, but I think lobbying is better used right now in getting licenses. But be thoughtful how much you pay for that lobbying. Shock Look said, what are your fair prices for delivery licenses in the Oakland Bay area? I don't have any specific data on that. What are your thoughts on that, Derek?
I'm thinking you're looking at anywhere between 3 to 5 times your EBITDA. That's roughly where it's at. So depending on how profitable you are and what your net income is, apply a 3 or 5 times multiple to that, and that's generally what you're looking at.
Tori brings up a very good question. This is something that you have to really, really, really understand this. So we mentioned earlier that legitimate tax-paying businesses, like cannabis businesses, don't have access to bankruptcy protection. This is true. You do not, because it's federally illegal. Now, she brings up, we incorporated in order to protect our personal finances. If we run into significant financial troubles and have to break our lease, will this protect our personal finances, like our house and 401ks and all that stuff? Derek, do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, honestly, it really depends on how the agreement was written and if there's personal guarantees or not. As a general rule of thumb, if it's in your name personally or if there's a personal guarantee on it, um, uh, you will oftentimes be potentially liable. But again, I would double check with a lawyer because it's also dependent on which city and state you reside in and what are those respective laws. But yeah, it really is unfortunate for cannabis operators because they get set up to protect their personal assets, but oftentimes it doesn't really do much for you, and you don't get the bankruptcy protection that's afforded to everyone else.
Got you. Debbie asks, she has a microbiz license that allows for manufacturing, distribution, and non-storefront retail, which is delivery. Are you saying that delivery component of our license is more valuable than others? I'm not saying any particular component because you can't break that license apart, but what it does allow you to do is get closer to the customer, and you can get that quicker feedback to what's going on inside the customer. So that's one thing to look at. But it depends. If more licenses come out such that more delivery licenses are there, then your delivery license is not as valuable for you going forward. But I think vertical integration is something that's good to have, but as Derek brought up, the complexities of running 3 separate businesses is very, very difficult. It's exciting to have all the licenses and be like having all that, but it's not always going to be that easy to run that business.
I think what happened historically was everyone was running towards, quote unquote, vertical integration as being the way to go. It does for sure help offset 280E liabilities. But what ended up happening is, many cannabis operators are just pure product enthusiasts. They just love cannabis. They love to consume it. They love how it makes you feel, but they're terrible business operators. And so what vertical integration then ended up doing was it just compounded the amount of headaches that they had to deal with. You could love cannabis and be a huge cannabis consumer, but if that's the case, you have to really ask yourself, do I want to go into business? And if I do, what's like the most basic thing I can do? I would say more oftentimes than not, don't run your business while you're consuming the product. And that's kind of like a duh statement. Obviously, you'll have the flip side where people say, it helps with their anxiety, helps with their body aches, helps with very medicinal factors. And we totally do understand that. And if that's the case, just make sure you have a solid team of people that you trust that can handle other aspects of the business that, oftentimes when you're consuming the product, they don't align. And one of those things is doing your accounting. Just, doing your accounting on cannabis is just not fun at all.
Yeah, it's not fun doing it just regular. Yeah. So Greg brings up a question here. Are we seeing a consolidation in the hemp and CBD markets? CBD, go ahead, Derek. You want to jump in?
Yeah, CBD and hemp, it's still the Wild West, and I think some of the main issues we're seeing is the efficacy. Everyone has their own 2 cents, and everyone has their own opinion. So it's still kind of hard to say. A lot of people will swear by it. A lot of people will also say I don't feel anything when I consume CBD. But largely, we're seeing just massive farms coming out of the Midwest. And I know, in California, for example, anyone can get a hemp cultivation license. It's like, it's maybe $800 to $1,600. So you're seeing a lot of parallels with that and what you're seeing in Oklahoma with regards to THC. But I think at least as of now, it's really hard to consolidate on the cultivation side because you have all these farmers all over the U.S. So that's very, very difficult. But on the brand side, yeah, you could definitely see some consolidation. I think it's just too new of a product to see it this early.
Yeah, I think the CBD market, like everyone tried to ride that wave. Every health person, every brand, like you were even seeing it at Kohl's. Kohl's was selling CBD. This is one of those things where like the really high efficacy brands that have good impact, right, are going to have that sticking power. But anyone that's like, I just started up my business with $2,500 and bought some white label products. If you didn't have any marketing or if you weren't focused on a target market, number one consultation that I did I had suggested that these people go and kind of focus specifically on veterans and on paying for veterans because they were both veterans and they had access to a market. So you're going to fail if you try to go after everybody and sell your product to everybody. Maybe you focus on just CrossFitters, or you focus on just stay-at-home moms or a specific market. You'll be able to have sticking power more than like everybody's going to want this because it works great. That doesn't really work in any line of business, whether it's technology, a product, anything like that. So be very thoughtful, because focus on a specific market. You'll be less impacted by the consolidation, potentially even seeing some upside when that happens. They'll pick up your brand when it goes for that.
Yeah, and I think to add on Jim's point, the problem that we're seeing in CBD is you'll have lotion companies, you'll have supplement companies. Pretty much everyone looks at cannabis and they see dollar signs. So, launching a CBD brand is, to that regard, a lot difficult, because you're competing with someone who's, been in business for 20, 30 years. They have their supply chain, they have their manufacturing. They're just adding, a couple letters to their product bottle, and they're adding, something on the back end to their supplements. So to that regard, CBD has been a lot more competitive, because, if you're running like a any sort of lotion line, for example, you're like, oh, I'll just add CBD and then we'll 2x the price. So to that extent, it's quite a bit more difficult.
Yeah, we're gonna stay here for probably like maybe 8-9 more minutes. So drop any last questions in here. We'll get to the last few I see here, but drop any more in, and then we'll get to those. And then if we have too many, we'll just kind of hook up for another live session here. So we got a question: how do you get credit card merchants without complications in California for the retail store? Credit cards are going to be next to impossible to get. Debit cards, significantly easier to get, because Visa said no credit card transactions on our network. This is use the main networks: Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express. They've all said do not do that on our networks. There are cannabis-specific debit card merchant processors. There's also particular relationships. If you have a bank, usually the banks have a preferred merchant processor who does take on these more high-risk industries and does process, but you will pay. You're not paying that 2.75% like you would PayPal. You're probably paying significantly higher than that in merchant processing fees, but it is possible. And I would suggest to every retailer, try to get debit cards into your retail outfit, because it'll increase your revenue significantly. Because if people feel like they can go and purchase with their debit card, because it's not a markup to them, they have easier they don't have to go carry cash. They don't have to go to the ATM and then do here and there, or they don't have to pay your exorbitant ATM fee. So that's one thing I would really, really suggest, trying to get your debit merchant processing as soon as possible. Credit card, you probably will never get credit card until this becomes federally legal. Visa, MasterCard, they're not going to risk their network value over $60 million in cannabis money. Like, it's not a lot of money when we look at it. Daniel asks, what kinds of expenses can a delivery service add to cost of goods sold aside from product purchases? Darren.
Yeah, so good question, Daniel. You can add your storage space related to cost of goods sold. So wherever you store the product, when you go and pick up the product, it's generally considered cost of goods sold. You can also do a percentage of your salaries and your overhead. So all these costs that are related to sourcing the product, picking up the product, storing the product, those are generally considered tax deductible. And then all the expenses that go to pushing the product out, those are generally not considered tax deductible. So you have to look at it on a line by line item basis, and then apply a certain percentage.
Debbie's now on Elaine. So Debbie, can you get debit merchant processing if you don't have a bank account? You can. You surely can. If you have a bank account, it's significantly easier, because you usually get a warm introduction at that point. Banking right now is all about personal relationships. No one is really advertising that they do cannabis business banking. You either have to be introduced by a CPA, you have to be introduced by another business who is inside that bank as well, right? So it's kind of like who you know kind of thing. So, that's just kind of the set for it. But I've seen a fair amount of people on LinkedIn and LeafWire that offer debit merchant processing. You can look through those. I'm not going to name any names, but there are some people out there that do offer that.
And also Debbie, if you're in this is also for all the Oklahoma individuals. We actually do have some really, really solid relationships with banks in Oklahoma. So reach out to our rep there, Lawrence. His email is LAWRENCE. I think Jim's going to type it in at greengrowthcpas.com. He'd be happy to help you out.
Yeah, let me just put that to everybody. 1 second here. Drop that in to everybody. I put it just. All right. So Lawrence's email's in there. Reach out to him. If you're in Oklahoma, he can take care and help you out with that. So Elaine brought something up like, LA phase 3 has just been a total mess with the licensing for social equity. They've waited over 1.5 years to worse, and still operating a delivery. Will this be detrimental for future applications in other cities where I have to show experience running a business, but it's impossible to secure a license? And it all depends on the jurisdiction. Some cities are like, hey, come bring cannabis to us. It depends on the city, because some cities are like, hey, like Pasadena, look at what's going on in Pasadena. There's multiple lawsuits. They're reevaluating MedMen. They're reevaluating Harvest. It might be another 1.5 years before they start opening licensed dispensaries out there. So it depends on where you go and what the robust DD that the city's going to do and the scrutiny they're going to put you through when getting other licenses. So I can't really give too much specific guidance on that. It's just a shame to see what has happened and transpired in LA. And, they really had an opportunity to make a good stand and do some right things. And I think it's just the ball's been dropped. A lot of aspects to that. I don't want to go too deep into it. Peter asked, what % of dispensaries do you think? Let's see here. Where'd that question go? What % of dispensaries do you think are operating illegal, and what geographies is this most pronounced? I saw an article that came out last year about Colorado. So they were like 5 years in, and they said that 70% of the cannabis is still black market. Right, that's 5 years in. I would say that that is even higher in the California. So like in the 80s at least. It's going to be, when you see a stronger black market, I brought this up earlier, is the older medical markets. Because what happened is that like Alabama, you can't go down there and like find a ton of illegal dispensaries. But go to California, you have no clue what's legal and not legal. The cops don't know what's legal and not legal. They don't even know what to look for sometimes. So, and it's built into the business plan of the black market to get caught. They just make as much money as they can. They pay no taxes, and they just escape to the next place. They operate for 90 days. It's like a little trap house here. So I would say it's significantly higher than people want to believe, and that the legislative bodies want to acknowledge. It's very, 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 very high. All right, cool. 4 minutes would be good. If you want to hop off, it's fine. Let me see here. Can a California cannabis biz bank in another state like Nevada? I'm not specifically sure on that. I'm sure that you can probably find other banks that will service you. But then you do the interstate commerce. That may not be a good look. Try to get a bank that's within the state that you're operating in. It's always suggested. But speak with the banker. They're the one taking on the majority of the risk as well. So ask them and see if they will fund you. Bank your money. You may have to pay more points on the money depending on how that goes. Tori, taxes is what's really keeping this industry down, right? Why would I, as a consumer, go buy a $35 eighth for $55 at a legal shop? We've been buying cannabis for 20 years out of our cousin's basement. Just because it's legal, the point I made earlier, just because it's legal doesn't mean you're going to see more people buy legal cannabis. They may kind of go and play with it and see what these shops look like, but it's not like it's going to be a step up and then kind of constantly go up higher. There's going to be a pretty big decay at that after that first initial honeymoon period. All right, guys. So we're going to kind of wind down here. Let me hit this last one here from Armin. You have several licenses under the same corporation name: cultivation, retail, transportation. Do you think we should somehow back up some operations? Every license. So the question is, they have licenses all under one entity. What should they do? I'm not sure. If you're in California, you probably cannot do this because you can't sell licenses or transfer them. You can only sell the business that owns the license. If you're going to go for licenses going forward, everybody, you need to make sure you put each license in its own holding company so that you can sell off parts of your business. I mean, you're probably stuck holding all of those licenses and you may have to kill some of them. You probably cannot sell a license. You can't transfer the ownership of a license. You can only transfer ownership of the underlying entity that owns that license. So We're going to sign off here, guys. So again, thank you very much. If we didn't get to your question, deepest apologies. Email us at admin@greengrowthcpas.com. Send the questions in. We'll either hop on for another live stream or maybe make some content around it. Aside from that, if you have any questions about the finances for your business, I'm going to put a little link up here. A little business financial chat. Look, you really need to be thoughtful about how you approach the next 6 to 8 months with this. You have to run it as a P&L, run it as a real business. This is not no hope and hype anymore. So reach out to us. Let's see how we can help you out, whether it's finding an exit strategy, whether it's getting into receivership, whether it's buying up other companies because you're crushing it right now and you have a lot of cash on hand. Let us help you out. So click on that on the corner there. There's a little thing that says sign up now. Sign up through the chat because we want to make sure we're talking to people specifically from this chat and prioritize those calls. We're getting a lot of calls every day, so I just want to make sure that you're getting that attention that you deserve. So again, thank you very much for your time. Have a fantastic rest of the week. We'll get a replay out for this later, but again, have a great day and we'll talk to you soon.